This story happened to me a while back, at a time when I was still adjusting to life as a divorced woman. It was one of those weeks when the kids were at their grandparents', leaving the house oddly quiet. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to finally fix the porch, which had seen better days and was creaking more than ever. So there I was, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, browsing through Craigslist for a handyman. That's when I found Jake's ad. His positive reviews stood out, and he seemed reliable. We arranged for him to start the next day. I remember feeling a mix of pride and relief taking charge of the house repairs on my own. Jake, the handyman I found on Craigslist, arrived early the next morning, just as the sun was painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. He drove up in an old but well-maintained truck, carrying all his tools and equipment. He was a tall man with a friendly smile, wearing a faded blue shirt and jeans that looked like they had seen many days of work. As he began unloading his tools, we struck up a conversation. He asked about the porch, and I explained how it had been creaking and needed some boards replaced. He nodded thoughtfully, inspecting the wooden planks with a professional eye. I found his easygoing manner comforting and felt glad about my choice to hire him. During our chat, I casually mentioned that my kids were at their grandparents' house for the week, and I planned to use the quiet time to catch up on some reading and maybe watch a few movies I had missed. Jake listened intently, asking a few polite questions about my kids and their interests. It felt nice to have some adult conversation, especially since my days were usually filled with children's chatter and activities. While Jake was over by his truck, I thought it might be a good idea to check on the progress of the porch. As I did, I noticed his toolbox carelessly left open. Inside, among the expected tools, were items that made my heart race: a roll of duct tape, heavy-duty zip ties, and something that looked like a set of lockpicks, though I wasn't entirely sure. But what truly sent chills down my spine was a glimpse of something that resembled a gun, wrapped in a grimy piece of fabric. My mind was reeling, trying to process these findings. Why would a handyman need these things for porch repair? As I stood there, I noticed Jake. He was standing near his truck, his eyes fixed on me. There was an unsettling intensity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. It felt like he was watching my every move. In a panic, I remembered Michael, my neighbor and friend who was home today. I quickly texted him, "Come over now, please, it's urgent." I knew Michael could be here in a matter of minutes since he was just next door. I was still trying to make sense of what I saw when Jake came back, asking for water. His demeanor had changed. There was a certain edginess to him now. As I went to the kitchen to get water for Jake, my hands shaking, I tried to stay calm, but the longer it took, the more scared I felt. Jake went back to working on the porch. While he was busy with his tools outside, I cautiously took out my phone and snapped a picture of him. I could do this easily because I could see the porch from the kitchen. When I was about to take the water to Jake, he came inside, asking for it again. Having him so close in the house made my heart race even more. It seemed like forever, but after a few long minutes, I finally heard Michael coming. Jake, noticing Michael through the window, suddenly got worried. He quickly made up an excuse about forgetting some tools and said he had to leave but would come back tomorrow. He left in a hurry just as Michael was walking up to the door. This made me even more worried and scared, thinking about what might have happened if I had been there by myself. Once Jake had left, Michael and I called 911. We explained everything to the responding officer, showing him the photo and giving him Jake's contact details. The officer took notes and assured us he would investigate. The next day, the officer called with shocking news. Jake was wanted in another state for a series of home invasions. This explained why he hadn't returned. He must have realized we were onto him and decided to flee. The realization that I had unknowingly let a dangerous person into my home was terrifying. I was grateful for Michael's timely arrival and the quick response of the police. It was a stark reminder to always be cautious, especially when alone. I spent the next few days with heightened awareness, double-checking my locks and being wary of strangers. The porch remained unrepaired, a minor concern compared to the safety of my family. Some time ago, Emily and I decided to tidy up our cluttered backyard. We had a bunch of things we hadn't used in a long time, like an old wooden garden bench, some rusty garden tools, and a birdhouse. We planned to sell them on Craigslist, hoping someone else might find them useful. I started with the bench, taking photos of it in the bright morning light. It was worn out, but I tried to make it look nice. Then I quickly snapped pictures of the other items. Sitting at the kitchen table, I posted all the ads and felt pretty good about it. Maybe someone would want to give these old things a new home. Emily and I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the yard. It felt nice to clear out all that stuff we didn't need anymore. A few days after we posted the bench and other items on Craigslist, we received a message from a man named Mark. He said he was interested in the bench and asked if he could come see it. Mark mentioned he had a really busy work schedule, so the only time he could visit was late in the evening. We thought that was a bit odd, but we said okay. The night Mark came over was really dark. There were more clouds than stars in the sky, and it felt kind of spooky. When he arrived, his car was old and made a loud rattling sound as it pulled up. He stepped out slowly, looking around as if he was checking for something. Mark didn't talk much about the bench. He just said, "Looks good," and nodded, but he seemed way more interested in other things around our yard. He asked about the old bike I had leaning against the shed, and he spent a long time looking at our new barbecue grill. It was like he was more curious about our stuff than the bench he came to see. Then something really strange happened. Mark said he needed to use our bathroom. We thought it was a bit weird, but we let him in. As he walked through our house, he kept looking around, like he was trying to remember everything he saw. He walked past the bathroom at first, accidentally going into our laundry room. He laughed it off, saying he got mixed up, but it felt weird. When he finally found the bathroom, he stayed in there for quite a while. We just waited in the living room, feeling a bit awkward. The house was really quiet, and it made us feel uneasy. After what felt like a long time, Mark came out and quickly said goodbye. He left as quietly as he had arrived, his car disappearing into the night. After he left, Emily and I looked at each other, both feeling a bit weird about the visit. We didn't say much, but we both felt like something wasn't right. It was just a feeling, but it was strong. The next morning, Emily and I were getting ready to go out. I was grabbing my jacket near the front door when I noticed something odd. "Hey, Emily, did you move the spare keys?" I asked, staring at the empty hook where they usually hung. We always kept a set of spare keys there just in case, but now the hook was bare. Emily came over, a puzzled look on her face. "No, I haven't touched them," she said, her voice filled with confusion. We started searching around the entrance, thinking the keys might have fallen off the hook. We checked the nearby table, the small shelf underneath, and even the floor, but there was no sign of the keys. Our search expanded to the entire house. We looked in all the usual spots, kitchen drawers, on top of the bookshelf, even under the couch, but nothing. Emily even rummaged through her purse again, and I double-checked my backpack. As we searched, a subtle unease began to grow. The keys disappearing like this was strange. We tried to joke about it, saying they must be playing hide and seek, but our laughter didn't sound convincing, even to our ears. I saw Emily bite her lip, a worried look crossing her face. "What if Mark took them?" she whispered. The thought had crossed my mind too, but I didn't want to believe it. "No, they must be here somewhere," I said, more to reassure myself than her. After searching for a while, we still couldn't find the keys. We were both feeling a bit stressed out by then. I looked at Emily and said, "Maybe we just missed them somewhere. They've got to be in the house." Emily nodded, though I could tell she was still worried. "You're probably right," she said, trying to sound hopeful. "They'll turn up eventually. We've looked everywhere they could possibly be." We tried to convince ourselves that the keys were just misplaced, hidden in some corner we hadn't thought to check yet. With that in mind, we finally left the house to run our errands. We returned home in the evening when it was almost dark, after an enjoyable afternoon at the movies. As we pulled into our driveway, something seemed off. Our front door was slightly open. We never leave it like that. A sense of dread filled us as we cautiously stepped inside. Our living room was in chaos. Cushions were tossed around, drawers yanked open, and our belongings scattered. It was clear someone had rummaged through everything. The worst part, there were no signs of forced entry. The thief had used a key. Our missing keys. We called the police, who arrived quickly. They confirmed our fears, no forced entry. We mentioned the missing keys and Mark's visit, but with no solid leads, they could do little. After they left, Emily and I stood in our violated home, feeling a deep sense of loss and vulnerability. Our safe haven had been breached, leaving us uneasy in our own home. After the police had finished their search for evidence and left, Emily and I began to take stock of what was missing. We moved through each room, a growing list of lost items weighing heavily on our hearts. Our television, some jewelry that Emily's grandmother had given her, and my laptop were gone. The next day after the robbery, Emily and I changed all the locks in our house. We couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. We were sure now that Mark had taken our keys. It made sense. He was the only stranger who had been in our house. Maybe he was waiting for us to leave, watching from somewhere, knowing he could easily get in with our keys. We were more careful now, always checking the locks twice before leaving the house. The memory of the open door and our scattered belongings stayed with us, a reminder to always be aware of who we let into our home. A few years ago, I had this dream of owning an electric bicycle. It was one of those things that always seemed just out of reach, a little too expensive or impractical. But every time I saw someone smoothly cruising by on one, that dream would come back, tapping me on the shoulder. So on a typical Sunday, a day I'd usually spend just lounging around, I found myself scrolling through Craigslist, fueled by this lingering dream and the hope of finding a good deal. After scrolling for a while, an ad popped up that instantly grabbed my attention. It was a sleek, modern electric bike, listed for only $600. The price was surprisingly low, almost unbelievably so compared to other listings. The photos showed the bike in excellent condition. Despite a nagging feeling that it could be too good to be true, my excitement got the better of me. I hesitated for a moment, but then thought, why not, and sent a message to the seller. His response came unusually quick. He explained he was in a rush to sell because he was leaving the city early next morning. This urgency in his tone should have been a red flag, but the possibility of missing out on such a deal clouded my judgment. As evening approached, I found myself in a taxi heading to the address given by the seller. The neighborhood was new to me, a quiet residential area with rows of similar houses. The taxi stopped outside a house that matched the address, but it was dark, without any sign of life. A little voice in my head whispered doubts, but I shrugged them off. I spotted the seller, a lanky figure waiting by the roadside. He had a nervous, jittery air about him. He greeted me with a quick nod and led me towards a detached garage at the back of the house. As we walked, I noticed he kept looking over his shoulder, as if wary of being watched. The garage itself looked old and neglected, standing in stark contrast to the well-kept houses around it. A sense of unease began to grow inside me, but the thought of the bike I was about to buy overshadowed my concerns. Inside the garage, it was pitch dark, a kind of darkness that felt thick and heavy. The seller mumbled something about the electricity being out and fumbled in his pockets, supposedly looking for a flashlight. In the eerie silence, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. Turning around, I squinted to see another figure stepping out of the shadows, joining the seller. My heart started to pound. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Just a friend," the seller replied, but his voice had a shaky edge to it. The new figure didn't speak. Instead, he moved closer to me, and I felt a sudden, sharp prod against my side. It was a gun. The cold, hard reality of the situation hit me like a wave of ice water. The seller's tone changed completely. "Hand over your money, phone, and anything else valuable. Now," he demanded, his voice now cold and commanding. Frozen with fear, I complied, pulling out my wallet and phone, handing them over without protest. The two men grabbed my belongings greedily. The one with the gun kept it pointed at me, ensuring I didn't make any sudden moves. After what felt like an eternity, but was only a few seconds, they backed away. I heard the crunch of gravel as they hurried outside. Peeking through the garage door, I saw them jump into a car parked a little way down the street. The engine roared to life, and they sped off, disappearing into the night, leaving me alone in the dark, empty garage. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, then, running on pure adrenaline, I bolted out of the garage and down the street. I didn't stop until I reached a house with lights on. I banged on the door, and a middle-aged couple answered. I quickly explained what happened, and they immediately let me in and called the police. Sitting in their living room, I tried to process the night's events. I had been so blinded by the prospect of a great deal that I had walked right into a dangerous situation. The police arrived within minutes. They were calm and professional, asking detailed questions about the incident. They inspected the garage, which was now just an empty shell with a few scattered tools and an old rusted bicycle. Certainly not the one advertised. The officers informed me that the house had been vacant for several months. It seemed I had walked right into a well-planned trap. One of the officers mentioned that they had seen a rise in similar cases recently, where online ads were used to lure unsuspecting buyers into robberies. As the investigation wrapped up, the officers assured me they would do everything they could to catch the culprits. I thanked them and the kind couple who had helped me, then stepped outside. I had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of trusting strangers and the risks of online deals. It was a night I would never forget, a reminder to always listen to that little voice of caution.